Alrighty, this is part 4, lecture 3 of using budgeting to help yourself save money and spend your money more effectively. I know myself, whenever I'm not tracking my spending, oftentimes other people are going to be spending my dollars for me, meaning that, whatever gets placed in front of me, I'll say, ooh, shiny, and then start, spending my dollars on it, when future me is going to be really upset. Because future me is smart and knows that just because things are shiny, you shouldn't buy them. Okay. In any case, many Americans complain because they have financial insecurity. Right? Things are too expensive for them. Things are they talk about struggling, going from paycheck to paycheck. Well, we can look at this data here, from a Gallup poll, about how Americans also have a hard time with budgeting. Yeah, so yes, there are a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck. There's also a lot of people that don't do a good job at budgeting. And I think one of the biggest things that can help you to lead a better life with your financials is an education. Thankfully, here you are getting to enjoy this educational video. And hopefully you can use this, what we're talking about, not just this, but also the whole class in general, right? But you can use what we're going to talk about through the part 4 of Common Sense Economics to use in your own life, right? Budgeting does require time. You should at least look at having a monthly budget that you look at, before each month starts, not at the end. You should look at it at the end, but not only at the end. And you should be looking at it as you go, right? It's not a set and forget kind of thing. The whole point of a budget is so you can constantly look how much you have in a certain category to spend. Many Americans don't have long-term financial plans. They don't have goals set, and that's very important, as we'll talk about in budgeting, right? Because one of the main reasons of budgeting is so you can set that money aside for your future goals, whether that's saving for retirement or even doing something like buying a car in cash that you'll have to set aside savings for. And it looks like only 32% use an online program to save their money. I'm going to say, even though that's highlighted in this handy dandy infographic here, I'm really only using this infographic for the top 2. Using an electronic one could almost be a bad thing, but certainly you want to use something to track your spending. We'll talk about that as we get to the end of our lecture today. In any case, budgeting is really easy. I would show this video, but unfortunately, if I show it, it ends up getting copyright striked by the people that produce SNL. So unfortunately, I am not going to show it. I totally recommend looking this up on YouTube. It's Don't Buy Stuff. Saturday Night Live. You can find it easy enough. It's a great bit where this author talks about his book, which is don't buy stuff you cannot afford. That's it. That's budgeting made easy. But we're going to get into it a little bit more. What's up, Darth and Stalin? Good to have you guys in here. Okay. Not sure who that is, Darth. I don't know who Chris Parnell is. Maybe that is him. I don't know. I know that this guy, I can't remember this guy's name. Anyways, that's What's-Her-Face from Parks and Rec. Leslie Knope. I can't remember her real name. And this is the guy from, so Chris Parnell, Steve Martin, of course. Chris Parnell, he is in, Hot Rod. And I think he's I think he's the guy from Hot Rod. Yeah. And I think he's the AM talk radio guy. But in any case, welcome, guys. Wow, Darth, look at you. You know you're Americans. Anyways, assuming none of these people are Canadian. Going on. The first step to budgeting is really a step 0, sue me, I'm sorry. And that's to start budgeting now. A lot of people think, I'm in high school, I don't need to start budgeting. No, you're not going to learn and develop the skill unless you start now. And if you're my students, you are going to have a budgeting project at the end of the year. I know dual credit will. My normal economics class, if we have time, we're going to have that project. And even if we don't, you should start budgeting immediately. There are 2 great things that budgeting helps you do, and that is to save and to spend your money wisely. Remember, a budget, you're just looking at money in and money out. Okay, so if you're only spending money on the categories that you've outlined you're going to spend money on, you're going to notice when you don't spend money in those categories and when you spend outside of those categories. And when, you'll realize just how quickly those drinks at Starbucks add up, or those slushies at a gas station adds up, or those candy bars. You'll realize, oh my goodness, gas is so expensive. Maybe I should go and stop driving as much. I say gas is expensive. It's really not expensive right now. Just bear with me in this example. In any case, budgeting makes sense for everybody. It's not when you're an adult. And if you want to be doing it when you're an adult, you should start doing it now, right? If you go on to college, even when you're in college, you should be budgeting. Even if you have money touching your hands, you should be budgeting, right? That's my point. It's an important skill to learn, and sadly, not enough Americans learn that skill, as we saw with this graphic here. And because a lot of Americans don't practice this skill of budgeting, they find themselves in financial stress a lot because they find themselves buying things that they don't necessarily need, or when financial stress arises, like, man, I really wish I would have been budgeting, so I had money set aside. Yeah. See, that budgeting system called, Kibo, that sounds similar to just, normal budgeting. I guess I don't see how it's a little bit different, but that's cool that they have a concept of it instead of just a word, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, the first thing you have to do when you're budgeting, this should be, really step one. I hate that I put step one here, but really, guys, the first step is to start budgeting. Yeah. Start thinking about, okay, this is my spending, and this is how much I had set aside for this category. Okay. So, first thing, set goals, right? You want to have some goals for the short term, right? Maybe that, okay, this month I have, or not this month, sorry, I'm going to have these various birthday parties this month that I'm going to want to buy, presents for a friend for, so I'm going to save up for those. I know that my car is going to need some tires replaced this year, so I'll save up for those. I know that within the next 5 years, I'm going to want to have, a down payment on a house, so I'll start saving up for that. Essentially, set goals for saving, and that way you can start saving up for these things. For the long term, you want to start setting goals for retirement, because there's going to come a time, folks, where you can't work, and you're going to want to have money set aside where you can live off of the interest that those investments are accruing, for you to be able to live off those the interest of those investments. Yeah. So you want to have short-term goals, long-term goals. Another short-term or medium-term goal could also be setting aside a rainy day fund. We'll talk about that at a later point in this last part of the book. But you got to set goals. Okay. So it could also be that, setting goals is one thing. Also set categories. How much do you want to spend on drinks at Starbucks, right? And maybe you could even set a goal for those categories. I want to spend less. So maybe the first thing is, you've tracked your spending in my class before. You know how much you spend. And if you don't know, you should get back to tracking your spending so you can see how much you know. Maybe try to reduce how much you're spending on these different categories that you don't think are quite productive. Yeah? So the third thing you're going to have to do is actually start budgeting. The very important thing, a very important thing that you must do is make sure every dollar you earn is accounted for. Okay? Every dollar you earn is accounted for. Now, when I say every dollar, I mean net, right? Because if you do gross, I myself, even as a person that likes looking at the budget, I don't do gross, right? Gross meaning how much your employer pays you. Net is how much after taxes is taken out, how much after your healthcare plan is taken out. For me, I just do net because that's how much I actually have to spend anyways, right? So then when I'm setting up my budgeting sections, I don't, I'll do things like gas, electricity, internet, mortgage, food. When I'm setting up all those categories, I'm going to set up those categories with in mind how much I'm actually getting from my employer. Okay. Now, if I get, a $20 birthday gift, do I budget that? No. Do I also spend that money like an idiot? Yes. So, if you want to spend your money wisely, you have to budget that money. If I were to not budget any of my paycheck, if I didn't budget any of my paycheck, just like how I don't budget, the $20 that I get as a gift, I would spend all my money if it was that $20, right? So, maybe if I wanted to spend that birthday money on something more important, maybe I would budget it, right? If I wanted to make sure that I had, that $20 sitting around in a little savings for when a video game comes out, for example, I think I have Let's see if I still have that money in here. I think I gave it to my wife to put in the bank account. But I had like $60 laying in my desk drawer here for the longest time. That way, when Cyberpunk 2077 comes out next month, I'm going to have the money there, right? I budgeted that money. I didn't put it on our actual budget that we have, but I budgeted it, up here. That way I could have that money set aside. Suspect that budgeting can be heavily influenced by inflation. Your budget will be different from year to year because of inflation, especially if you're not getting raises. Thankfully, budgeting happens slow enough that you're probably not going to be accounting for it, each month. Because again, what I'm thinking, I budget for how much money I have coming in, and I try to spread that money out across all of the different categories that I'll have, and then I'll say, okay, I am spending this much on these categories to get by. How much money do I have left over? And that's hopefully going towards paying off debts if you have those, or towards saving and investing if you're able to do that too. Okay. All right. So essentially, remember earlier when I said, if you don't budget, someone else is going to budget your money for you. This is what I mean by this, right? Because when I earn those $20, for birthday, I say earn, when I get that $20 for my birthday, if I don't budget them, essentially someone else is going to tell me how to spend that money, right? I'm going to see an advertisement for a stupid game about these beans that jump up and down on obstacles called Fall Guys. And I'll be like, yeah, impulse purchase. Sure, sign me up. Because I didn't have that $20 gift budgeted, I spent it on something stupid that I regret. Maybe I should go back and revisit Fall Guys. I don't know. Yeah. Because I didn't have, $5 or $6 budgeted, I spent it unwisely on buying, what's the other bean game where you kill each other? I spent it on, unlocking Among Us, or I spent it on getting the ad-free version on my phone, right? If you don't budget your money, if you don't budget your dollars, other people will spend your dollar. Other people will be spending your dollars for you, right? The marketing team at Among Us spent my $6. The marketing team at Fall Guys spent my $6. My friends that wanted to play, Fall Guys with me spent my $20, right? It wasn't me spending that money. It was me spending that money, right? But essentially, it wasn't the smart me making decisions. And if you budget, you'll have that smart version of you making the decisions, right? You'll avoid making those impulsive decisions because you've already outlined where your money's going to go. Then it's going to come from actually following the budget, right? And that still requires self-discipline. One financial guru, his name's Dave Ramsey. One of his quotes is that, he says, financial planning, for yourself, it's 90% behavior and only 10% head knowledge. Okay. And then really that's true, right? Making the budget and following it, that's super hard, right? Doing the number crunching and whatnot, that's a small part. Once you do that, it's all about behavior. Okay. All the difficulty comes from following it and being true to the budget that you set in front of you. Okay, and another thing to mention too, if I don't budget, $5, nothing just costs $5, right? So when I spend, $5 is not budgeted, odds are it's probably going to be pulling something from another category. And that really takes us, I'll show you an example budget here in a second. I want to find some categories, and there's some really good advice popping up in chat. I'll read it here in a second. But generally, your plan for when you're budgeting will be about 80% of being expenses. I think, and this is a 10-80-80 plan. It's just pretty much an 80-20 plan where you're spending 80 and then the other 20 has a different job of being spent now. You're saving 10, you're giving 10. And guys, really, it's up to you how you want to do your own budget. I can share with you what we did ours. I think we do, our plan is to save 15, right, for investment / and then, giving, we give our 10% as well, and then we spend the remainder. You do the math. But the idea is that, again, we have everything budgeted, right? And I'm not a, behavioral psychologist, right? But it feels good to give your money. I think it's important to give your money. There's other reasons why you may want to give, but I don't know. It's important. I think you guys should do it too, and you'll find a lot of joy in doing it, right? If you can. Give what you can. Don't be giving money. You see people on Twitch all the time donating to streamers when they have no reason to be doing so. But it's important if you get yourself, work yourself, use a budget, right? So you can become financially stable. And then once you're able to give, be sure to do so. Once you get to the end of the month, right, as you're spending, right, and then once you get to the end of the month, look back, see where you fell into some traps. Did you budget, only $20 for Starbucks and then spent too much, right? Maybe, you need, that'll give you something to look at your own behavior and be like, man, I budgeted this much, but I spent this much. I need to do better at that, right? The whole point of making a budget is so you can keep on comparing, right? So let's actually get into looking at a budget. I have something in mind. We will come back to the slides here in a second. But let's go. I talked about Dave Ramsey. I know he'll have a good form for us to fill out or look at. Come on. I found one of these for my students last year. There's all sorts of great Excel sheet ones as well. I'm looking for one that looks friendly. This is the quickest, friendliest one that I can find. So we're going to open up this one. There we go. All right, so we're back. I'm going to zoom in. Is that visible? There we go. Perfect. So there was actually some good advice here in chat that we're going to bring up here in a second as we get to this anyways. Important part of budgeting is to check for any recurring payments that you don't need to make anymore, right? So I know this probably isn't for you guys that are necessarily high school students, but maybe if you have Spotify and you don't listen to Spotify anymore, but you're still paying a monthly subscription to Spotify, look into that. I know there's all sorts of people who will be subscribed to an online video game and then stop playing the online video game and then come back years later and be like, wow, I was paying $5 a month for this. Over the course of 5 years, 5 times 12, 60 times 5. Hundreds of dollars giving it to a company to not even play the game, right? So that's one thing, especially when those easy recurring payments can be small. And that's one of the biggest things too, right? Because if you're looking at your spending, right, each month, right, you're looking at your bank account, looking at your budget that you had set, and double checking the numbers, you'll hopefully be able to recognize those things where you have money slipping through. Also, one thing to do as you're setting up a budget, one of the first things you should do is set up your recurring payments. So if I know that, I don't have 2 mortgages, I only have 1. But if I know what the mortgage payment on my house is each month, and you should, right? You'll write that right there, right? Or this could be rent, right? If you're not paying a mortgage, you'd be paying rent. So that's one thing automatically you're gonna have to deduct. Yeah. You should be able to have an estimate of how much in electricity you're gonna pay, in water. If you have gas and electric, right? You'll have both, or maybe you just have one or the other. You should know what your phone bill is going to be each month, so you can put that down. I know for me, my trash bill is $22, but it's every 3 months. So I could do one of 2 things. I could have it set up to where I don't have this category filled in each month, right? Or I could do what's called prorating, where I would take that $22 and I would divide it by 3, so $21.30. $7.30. And I would budget $7.30 each month and make sure I am consistently putting that much into savings. That way, once this comes to pay, I'll be able to pay that $22. Don't buy cable. I don't buy cable, right? I just have internet, but I guess they don't have internet on here, right? So anything that is a utility, oftentimes you can budget these way before it comes time to do the transaction, because these should be roughly the same amount each month. Maybe you'll see gas and electric go up in the winter because you're spending more on heating. Maybe electricity could be going up in the summer as you're spending more on cooling. Food is another one of those things that should be relatively consistent from month to month. I don't know, maybe you eat more in the winter as you're hunkering down. Your goal is, even if you have a car, right, you'll have a car payment. Ideally, you'd like to, not have a car payment, right? You like to buy a car in cash if you can, and buy a used one if you can. We'll talk about that in another section. Gas. And oil, right? You should be changing your oil. Was it every 3 months? It's been a minute. I think it's every 3 months. So that's another thing that you can prorate, right? Learn how to change your oil. That can also save you a little bit of money, but at that point, it's really only costing you you buy the oil yourself anyways, so you're really just paying somebody else $10 to change your oil. So if the $10 is worth it a lot to you, right, you got to look at your opportunity costs, right, changing your oil, what you could be doing with that time. You could prorate the oil as well, but gas, you're going to be spending roughly the same amount, so you'll be able to budget this relatively easily, assuming gas prices aren't changing. Of course, this is something that you can look at from month to month if you realize, man, gas prices have gone down a lot. I had budgeted $100 for gas this month, and I only spent, $75. I'm going to look at moving that $25 extra because those $25 extra dollars, they don't have jobs anymore. I got to go find a job for these extra $25, right? Car tires or just general repairs. Honestly, I would throw these into a. I know tires are probably supposed to be replaced on a set time schedule. I'm not a person that's smart with cars. So I couldn't tell you, how often that is. But I know for repairs and car tires, I don't know how often I'm going to be doing repairs. So we're going to talk about this later, but this may be something that falls under a kind of a rainy day fund or an all-purpose fund where that there's going to be things that are going to come up, right? I know there's going to be things like, repairs for my house, repairs for my cars. I know there's going to have to be things where I'm going to have to end up, paying money for something, but it's not necessarily a world-breaking emergency. But I know that I'm going to have to have money set aside, so maybe I'll make another category, on this budget where I put, money to set aside. I recommend like an emergency budget where you have 3 to 6 months of cash saved up. That way, when things like this come up, you can easily pay for it, and then just as the next few months go by, budget that money aside for it as well. Car insurance, that should be the same amount every month, so that's something you can set aside. For clothing, you may have to select an amount here. I know for some people like myself, I hate buying clothes. So I really, the amount of money that my wife and I have set aside for clothing, it can change, right? If there's a month that I'm buying clothes, she buys, I can't remember how much we set aside for clothes each month. I don't know, it's like $50 or something. There may become a month where I need to buy clothes, and because I don't buy clothes as often, we have to change for that month how much we're going to be budgeting for clothes, right? But the idea is you're really in tune with what you're spending, and you're making sure that all of your dollars have jobs, right? And that'll get you the number of how much you're spending. And another thing, folks, this actually doesn't have it. I was thinking it would be at the bottom. I thought I saw it at the bottom. It didn't. You're going to want to have somewhere at the top how much money is coming in, okay? Because how much money is coming in should be equal to this much here, right? The amount that you're budgeting should be equal to how much money you have coming in. If you have $1,000 coming in each month, you should be having $1,000 of giving, saving, housing, utilities, food, transportation, clothing, personal, and other miscellaneous items. That should add up to $1,000. Every single dollar should be budgeted for, okay? So once you have all these dollars budgeted, there's a couple different ways that you can actually go through living on a budget. One way is the infamous envelope plan, okay? Where you literally have each of those categories that we just looked at in an envelope. And if you run out of money in that envelope, guess you're not getting food. If you run out of money in that envelope, I guess you're not buying clothes. Of course, you're still buying food, right? But it shows you quite literally that you're taking from another envelope. You're like, man, I'm giving up some of my clothing here doing this. Yeah? Oh, man. There goes the money for my my little girl's recital dress. Sorry. You can see how your spending is impacting other categories. Yeah? It's very behavioral. Another thing you notice is that there's cash there. It's not plastic. I think there's been some studies, at least financial guru Dave Ramsey talks about these studies where you feel you're spending a lot more, and there's some negative feedback happening. I guess not negative. In psychology, positive feedback is when you introduce a stimulus. I'm not a psychologist, right? But there's some feels bad happening when you give the paper money and then you get less paper money back. Whereas opposed when you use plastic, you swipe your card and they just give you stuff, right? You're giving nothing and you're getting stuff. Whereas with cash, you're getting stuff, but you have to give something to get it, right? So there's some feels bad there. So this is the envelope system. Another thing that you could do Once you've gotten to the point where maybe you are consistently only spending what's in the categories, maybe then you can move on to some electronic tools. But you have to be very careful. If you jump right into electronic tools and you're a person that doesn't have the best self-control, you may run into the problem where it's doing all the work for you, and therefore you're not doing any of the work, which means you're not doing any of the learning. Some of these can be hooked up into your bank account, which is largely fine security-wise. I haven't heard of any that have had any serious breaches, but it means that you're not thinking up here about your budget, and that's the most important part of budgeting. Remember, most of budgeting, right? 90% of budgeting is all behavioral, right? Only 10% of it is the actual knowledge and number crunching, okay? And you want to be able to make sure you're interacting with that budget. And if it's just taking everything and filling in like, oh, look at that, I've spent $90 on candy bars so far this year and I have 100 budgeted this month, and I have 100 budgeted, you're not actually thinking about it. You're not actively seeing how much, before you make each purchase. Whereas if you're working with something like this, you very well, would be actually interfacing with how much you have budgeted, right? This does it automatically, and when things get automated, they often aren't thought about. Okay, so that's budgeting. Remember, the whole purpose of budgeting is so you can save and spend wisely. Okay, so if more Americans did budget, this would lead to more, financial security. But instead, they don't, and they end up spending more than they earn, which leads to debt. And debt's not fun because it means you're paying interest for all the things that you're buying, interest on all the things that you're buying, which leads to more financial insecurity. Well, one of the best things that you can do to increase how much money you have each month is to not be paying others to buy stuff, right? To not be paying interest. So budgeting helps you spend wisely as well as be able to save, which means you're going to be avoiding debt and lead yourself to financial security and financial stability. Okay, so that's all we have for today. Thank you and have a good